elections during and before. So I've had a fair amount of exposure to Johnson County. I would have to say that this past election, in terms of the success of moderate candidates for local elections, is the most success I have seen in the time I've been serving as an elected official. So we have a lot to talk about this evening. First a word, I want to thank you all for attending here this evening. This is an unusual effort to date by Mainstream. This is the first time we've tried to hold a forum like this in this part of the county. And it's very encouraging to see this robust turnout this evening. I want to thank you for coming, and I assure you we're going to be doing things in the future to try to build upon the success of this event. Mainstream, for those of you who aren't familiar, is an organization that started in 1993. It was a response to growing conservative, fundamental religious efforts in the political arena. It had as its original focus separation of church and state and issues related to that. Over the years, it has evolved and identified issues that are of primary concern to this particular community. In the past couple of years, we focused on education and support for education funding. We have supported on reasonable budget, another related issue to education. And in the past couple of years, we've begun to focus on the need for expanded medical care and medical services in our community and the government support for those things. We anticipate moving forward another couple of years, or for the next couple of years, in these same areas. Tonight, we're gathered to discuss what might happen in the coming legislative sessions, and at the very least, to identify the issues that are expected to come to the fore. So we have three great panelists here this evening, and before I introduce them, I want to give our elected officials and our officials designate elect a chance to introduce themselves. And because I don't have a list, I'm going to ask you all to stand up and introduce yourselves, remain standing, and then we'll give them a round of applause when we've completed the introductions. So Melissa, would you be so kind as to start?
Melissa Rooker, I represent the 25th District. I live in Fairway and represent the northeast corner of Johnson County state line to Metcalf, 47th Street to 67th Street. Thank you all for showing up tonight and being here.
Linda?
I'm Linda Gallagher. I was just elected to my second term in the House of Representatives. I represent District 23, which includes parts of Shawnee, Lenexa, and Overland Park, 71st Street to 95th Street down to Oak Park Mall, and Flum to Schweitzer. And it's nice to see just such a big crowd here tonight.
Good evening, Patty Markley. I'm representative-elect for the 8th District, which we're almost in, but not quite. It's 119 to 159, and either Schweitzer and Antioch over to Flum. So we're just on the wrong side of Antioch to be a District 8. Thank you, Coach.
I'm Joy Costin, representative-elect for House District 28, which is Southeast Leawood, Overland Park, Metcalf to state line, 127th to 151st. And I'm very happy to be here, and I appreciate your taking time to be here as well.
Brett Parker, representative-elect from the 29th House District, which is straight north of here on Antioch, just on the other side of 127th Street.
I'm Dinah Sykes, Senator-elect for District 21, which is all of the city of Lenexa and downtown Overland Park, 91st to 71st and Metcalf. Thank you for being here.
John Skibble, Senate District 11, Icon, Senator-elect, and it encompasses Overland Park.
Hi, I'm Sean Powerwater. I'm newly elected District 27 House, 151st Street South. I got the southeast corner of Johnson County. Thank you all for your overwhelming support. Thanks for coming out.
Anybody else on that side?
I'm Janet Waugh. I'm a member of the State Board of Education. I am completing my term. I have 2 more years on this term. I represent all Wyandotte, all Leavenworth, eastern part of Douglas and a small section of Johnson, so I can't get the street names.
Up front, Jerry, do you want to start?
I'm Jerry Soxel. I'm the representative-elect from the 21st District, primarily in Prairie Village, 3 districts in Overland Park, 1 in Mission Hills, 1 in Leawood. And I had to wean myself off of going door to door. I'm only going to 20 nowadays. So.
Hello, I'm Nancy Lusk. I represent the 22nd House District, and it includes downtown Overland Park, Shawnee Mission West, and the Central Library. So the borders are 75th to 95th, Metcalf on the east, and goes over to about Spicer. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Any other elected officials? Hi, Cindy.
Hi, I'm Cindy Holscher, representative for District 16, which is pretty much the crossroads of the 3 major school districts and home of Johnson County Community College. Goes from Schweitzer to Plum, 127th up to 95th.
Thank you. Let's give these people a round of applause. I also want to recognize that we have a significant number of people who ran for office. They ran outstanding campaigns. They were not successful in terms of a win in the election, but I do think we ought to at least recognize them rather than give names and so forth. If you all would just stand so that we could say thank you for your efforts and interest. Well, on to the program, and we're only 5 minutes behind schedule. So here's the way things will go this evening. We have 3 speakers. I'll introduce all 3 of them, and then we'll turn it over to them. They'll each make some opening remarks in the neighborhood of about 10 minutes. You have on your seat cards, and they're blank on one side. If you have questions or if their comments prompt questions, please fill those out. We'll collect those from time to time, and when they have finished their initial remarks, we'll move into a Q&A session. We will take questions from the audience, but we'll also use these questions that you've submitted in writing. They'll be highly edited. Questions about email servers will not be permitted. But other than that, it's pretty open discussion, and we certainly encourage some give and take here and look forward to hearing from you and getting your questions answered. So first of all, our first speaker tonight will be Annie McKay. Annie is the president and the CEO of Kansas Action for Children. She's a Kansas native. She was previously the executive director for the Kansas Center for Economic Growth. She's been a regular voice countering Brownback administration's economic policies, including a number of extremely informative sessions here with Main Street. We're grateful for her contributions. Before that, she worked at the University of Kansas evaluating early childhood and federally funded programs targeting low-income students. Jennifer Crow. She's worked in Kansas politics for over a decade. She's also a Kansas native. And I believe she's the daughter of an elected official formally. I have that right? Yes. Anyway, Jennifer is an elementary school teacher. She began working as an elementary school teacher in Kansas City, Kansas, and Blue Valley. She returned to school for a law degree, and while practicing law, she was tapped by Governor Kathleen Sebelius to lead efforts on human services, healthcare, and early childhood, among others. She continues to work in politics with a special focus on education, child welfare, and health. And our final speaker this evening is Sheldon Weisgrau. He's the director of Health Reform Resource Project, an initiative to promote health reform in Kansas. Sheldon has more than 30 years of experience in health policy. He's worked effectively in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors to ensure the delivery of healthcare services in rural, underserved communities, and to enhance the knowledge and engagement of healthcare consumers, providers, and policymakers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Annie, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Ed. Everybody hear me okay? Is the mic live? Good, excellent. So thanks to Mainstream for hosting this tonight. As Ed had mentioned, I feel like I've been a frequent flyer. I have a punch card now with Mainstream Coalition and the number of forums that we've done. But I always appreciate the crowd that they gather and the information that they present. My name is Annie McKay, and I'm the president and CEO of Kansas Action for Children. I stepped into that role in June and now have an opportunity to lead a team of folks who we believe that Kansas can be the best state to raise a child. And so we do policy advocacy in 3 areas: economic policy, health policy, and education policy. And so I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about some of that economic policy, and I'm going to tell this story in 3 parts. But first, as a fiercely proud native Kansan, I want to frame this through our state motto, ad astra per aspera. And I think it's really important because I think while we have felt like we've been living the through difficulty part, and if you haven't, talk to me after. There's no doubt about that, but after August's primary and November's general election results, it certainly feels like we can again and start getting back to the stars part of our state motto. But to do that, we still have more work to do. And that's one of the things I want to really emphasize, is that we've taken really important steps in forging a new path for our state. People got out, they got involved. We activated communities all over the state of Kansas, and we have more work to do to support our newly elected and our returning policymakers to make sure they have what they need to carry out the next steps. So a first quick recap of how we got here. If you've not been tuned in over the last 4 years, welcome. But things aren't great. And what's interesting is that last week I had friends from all over the country who were connected to networks who were calling me distraught because they sort of felt like we've been feeling this the last several years in Kansas. And I said, I understand you're fearing what might be a Brownback tax plan. We can help you through that. We run support groups. But a little bit about what we did 4 years ago. And the reason why this is important is because I think we've been like a frog in a pot of boiling water. And a lot of us have forgotten exactly what was that we did 4 years ago. How did we get to where we are today? There's a lot of stuff that's front of mind for Kansans. We've all heard about the business exemption, right? And a lot of Kansans are now familiar with that. But we have to understand that was just one part of the changes that we made. And in order to bring prosperity back to the state of Kansas, there are greater things that have to be addressed within the total tax reform package. So what we did back in 2012 and 2013 to spark the state to be that adrenaline shot, all things that are tired that we've heard of. But what we said to 330,000 businesses, you all no longer have to pay individual income taxes. We took that all the way down to 0. The idea being that these small businesses would then use that money to turn around and create jobs, that it would be such explosive job growth that we just simply wouldn't know what to do with ourselves all over the state of Kansas. So if you follow the Kansas Center for Economic Growth at all and the work that they've done and that we did over the last 4 years, you might know that that hasn't happened. Or if you read Yale Abuhalka before he left the Casey Star, he too frequently reported that our private job growth rate, in fact, did not take off. And it's near the bottom of the country and has remained that way. The other part was that we changed individual itemized, income tax rates, excuse me. We collapsed the top 2 brackets and we gave everybody a cut. When we got focused on the business exemption, we lost sight of the fact that those changes to the individual income tax rates were really what was the biggest cost factor. The business exemption was about 1/3 of the revenue loss. The individual rate changes were about 2/3 of the revenue loss. So when we have this conversation in 2017, understand that when you're talking to your friends and your neighbors, and you're talking to your policymakers, the returners and the newly elected, there's a lot more that we have to address than just the business exemption. Because if we do that and only that, we don't pave a road with that. We don't keep the lights on in schools. We certainly don't fund a new school funding formula. We have to go further if we want to restore stability to our budget. Where we are today, if anybody looked at the Fort Hays State Docking Institute Kansas Speaks survey from October, it was released at the end of October. What's remarkable is that 70% of Kansans feel like the state is headed in the wrong direction, because it has been. We've had horrendous private job growth. We've not seen families get ahead. We've raised the sales tax twice. We've eliminated important deductions and credits for working families. We eliminated itemized deductions for middle-income families and fixed-income seniors. We've done a lot of harm, and all of those things did not bring balance to our budget. At the same time, we've had 9 consecutive rounds of budget cuts. I know you all know these things, but we have to step back and look at the enormity of what has happened over the last 4 years and what it's cost us. While we've struggled to pave roads and repair roads, what we focus on at Kansas Action for Children is lost opportunities for little kids. And so I think about what's at risk. I think about what we've done so far. We've taken over $100 million from programs for early childhood and high quality care services. I know $100 million may not seem like a lot, but let's quantify that in terms of lost well, right, sorry. All of a sudden, $100 million is chump change these days. But I want to talk about this in terms of lost opportunity for Kansas's youngest, most vulnerable people. Children birth to 8. The intent of those resources, the intent of the investments in birth to 8 programs all over the state, early care and education, home visiting services, detection for autism, connection to mental health services. I could go on and on and on. But that's to position our kids to have the best start in life and be prepared as they enter the K-12 system, to close the gaps that are created by poverty, to address the needs of families all over the state who are at risk with multiple risk factors all over our state in every community. This isn't exclusive to one part of the state. There isn't a community in Kansas where these families don't live amongst us and need the resources, and we've cut and cut and cut. Last summer in June, when the governor announced yet another round of budget cuts, half of the Children's Initiative Fund programs took a 14% hit. 14% hit with 1 month to go, and figure out how to plan for that. The other thing that's at risk now, how many of you by show of hands have heard of the Children's Initiative Fund? Excellent, this is a good start. Children's Initiative Fund is the network of early childhood programs across the state of Kansas. We were fortunate almost 20 years ago to have the forethought. We had policymakers and other influencers who said, there's a stream of money coming into the state from Master Tobacco. 40 some odd states sued Master Tobacco. Some of those states decided to just put the money into their general fund and watch it just wash away. But at the time, Kansas said, we're gonna lock that into statute and we're gonna do something special with it. And by special, I don't mean unicorns and rainbows and sunshine. I mean investing in something that mattered, where there is significant return on investment. For every dollar you invest in early childhood education and high quality care, there's a $7 to $12 return. And so almost 20 years ago, we said, we're gonna put that into statute, and that money's gonna come into the state, and we're gonna invest in early childhood education programs, high quality care programs. We've been doing that for almost 20 years. In last legislative session, the governor eyed that pot of money, knowing that he faced a budget crisis, and said, let's sell it off. Let's sell it off and get a lump sum payment for it. We're that desperate for cash, we're gonna sell the money that we support little kids with. 3 times he attempted to do it, and 3 times the legislature pushed back and said, that doesn't make sense. We've gotta address the issue. We were fortunate then. We still face another issue coming this legislative session, and I have every reason to believe that securitization, that's selling off the Children's Initiative Fund, will absolutely come up again and be pushed by this administration, because it's quick cash. We would get that lump sum payment. The Children's Initiative Fund comes into the state in perpetuity. So long as people are smoking, I don't want to encourage anybody to pick up the habit for Kansas kids, but so long as people are smoking across the country and Major Tobacco is getting a profit, that money will continue to come into the state in perpetuity. And what the governor proposed was saying, forget forever, let's take that settlement and go, and let's plug it in the state budget. If we do that, everybody, I just want you to understand, if we take that lump sum settlement, there is no room in this budget to support early care and education. Come July 1st, we don't know how we would support parents as teachers, or early Head Start, or home visiting services. So that's what's at risk for Kansas Action for Children. And if we connect that then to the preparation of little kids for K-12, and we think about the struggles that our school faces right now, early education is part of that gap closer. Last summer, Kansas Action for Children co-released a report with the Annie Casey Foundation called the Kids Count Report. And what did we find out about Kansas? That we fell from 13th to 30th in 4th grade reading proficiency. 13th to 30th. Early education can help address that. As we continue to invest in that and send kids ready to K-12 to learn, we can help address that ranking and push Kansas back up. But we don't stand a chance if we totally sell out on the Children's Initiative Fund. So those are some of the things that it sets at risk. We can have a group cry after we're done here. But I want to focus now and shift to the solution. This is the ad astra part. This is where we get to be aspirational, because we're sending nearly a third new folks into the 2017 legislative session. And I know that they have some significant tasks ahead of them. I understand that. But we finally have an opportunity to fix the problem, to get real tax reform. So that involves putting 330,000 businesses back on the tax roll with the rest of us. It also involves taking a look at the individual rates. But one of the key things as a policy component that we all have to understand is the march to zero. We are all on the march to zero. The state is on the march to zero, but we are nowhere near zero. The original part of this plan was that we would eliminate entirely income tax in Kansas. The state still gets 40% of its revenue from income tax. Our budget is a dumpster fire right now, and we still get 40% of our revenue from income tax. There's no way a state like Kansas can afford to go to zero on income tax. We simply don't have the economy to support something like that. So we've got to go back to, in some ways, looking at the structure that we had before. Before we made all these radical changes, we had about 50% of the state's revenue coming from income tax, about 50% of it coming from sales tax. Right now, that's become mildly out of balance as we've increased the sales tax twice. On December 7th, there's a coalition that will be unveiling a plan. That coalition consists of Kansas Action for Children, the Kansas Center for Economic Growth, Kansas Contractors Association, KNEA, Kansas National Education Association, Kansas Organization of State Employees, and others who are joining us to say we've got to have real tax reform. We launched that last week with the first blog post from former state budget director and longtime policymaker Dwayne Gosen. He's a senior fellow with the Kansas Center for Economic Growth. Another blog post was released today from Mark DeSetti with KNEA, calling for an end to the march to zero. And you'll notice a theme, because we're going to continue to do this until we unveil the final plan on December 7th. The idea is that this may not be the plan ultimately that policymakers embrace, but we have to start the conversation somewhere. And we do intend to introduce a bill when the legislative session starts. We believe that the components that we put forward, in addition to addressing the record high food sales tax rate in Kansas, have to be part of the conversation in 2017. We've been working with our national partners at the Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy to help come up with that plan. This is not something simply that we slapped together. There's actually numbers behind it, real math, not magic math, to help policymakers find a way to restore balance in the budget again. But know this, there's a lot of work left to do. What comes next is not going to be easy. But as Kansans, I really think about the state motto. I think about our state flower, the sunflower, which rises to face the sun every day and take that heat. And I know that it's in our DNA to do this. We have to be supportive of new policymakers, though, if we want to be successful in this. So lifting up your voices and joining us in this endeavor will be really important. Staying focused in 2017, when you've got proponents of the failed tax plan working to spin us all in different directions so that we lose track and sight of what the real problem is. That's been successful over the last several sessions when we start looking at each other and saying, and cannibalizing one another in our investments. When early ed looks at contractors and highways and says, hey, I'm sorry, we can't pay you, but we got to protect these little kids. We decided as a coalition to stand together to do something different. We started that work back in April and we're continuing it in December. If you have an opportunity to join us at the State House on December 7th, I encourage you to do so. The event is on Facebook. It's on Kansas Center for Economic Growth, Kansas Action for Children. Our other partners have shared it as well. You're welcome to get in contact with me and I can provide that to you. We'll also be live streaming it on Facebook. That's just the start. Stay engaged in the 2017 session. We've gotten a long way towards our goals of restoring health and prosperity in the state of Kansas. We've got great folks coming into the 2017 legislative session. I'm excited for the people returning, and I'm excited for us to get to work. I think there's a lot of possibility that lies ahead of us. So with that, it's sort of, it's a blunt stop. But I'm going to pass the mic to Jen.
I gave Annie most of my time, so. Thanks, Annie. I'm here to talk about courts. I'm not Ryan Wright, I'm Jennifer Crow. Brian was not able to be here tonight. He ran the Kansas for Fair Courts campaign. And I guess all I have to say is that we retained all of our higher court judges. And I'm not going to say that we should blanket retain judges, but I definitely am not one to say that we should blanket wipe out the entire Supreme Court and the entire appellate court and have a governor like Sam Brownback appoint our judges. So that was a big success. I think it's unfortunate that the Brownback appointees received more approval and votes as opposed to the other judges. I don't know his approval rating. Perhaps that's so I hope that we can the top of the ticket. I think that this is something that is going to continue to progress as far as the attack on the judiciary. And I think that's a major issue because it is a branch of government that cannot defend itself. So I think that's probably my big thing to say. Holla! We've got great candidates. We've got great people coming in. It's been a tough 4 years. And I came out of Sebelius administration and from a moderate Republican leadership in the House and Senate. And it's been a tough 4 years. And I know y'all have been there too. But I think the sun might shine again. So thanks.
With all this time, settle in, folks. Because I'm here to talk about what's going on in healthcare. And what you heard from Annie and Jennifer was obviously big changes in Kansas to move us in a more moderate direction. Now, to the extent that healthcare policy depends on what happens at the federal level, and it does in a big way, not so much. We're moving in we're moving in the other direction. And I want to talk about what that's going to mean. I mean, I would have normally, 10 days ago when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about tonight, I was all prepared to give you my 10-minute advocacy pitch on how we're going to expand the Medicaid program in Kansas this session. We've made enormous progress towards educating folks around the state about that issue. A lot of the new candidates that are both in this room and around the state that are coming to the legislature had that issue on their platform. That's obviously a lot more uncertain at this point, and I'll talk about that in a second. But there are obviously other healthcare issues in Kansas that are state-specific issues that are really important that we have to deal with. I spent all day today and I'll spend all day tomorrow in a meeting of the CanCare Oversight Committee, which is a joint committee that oversees the state's Medicaid program, which is known as CanCare since we privatized it 3 years ago. For those that are not familiar with what's going on with the CanCare program, it's pretty consistent with what's going on with the rest of state government. The wheels have largely fallen off. So what the committee heard today and what they're going to hear tomorrow are just a litany of problems with how the state cannot even do basic administrative functions. Very little interest or ability over the last several years in overseeing what the private managed care organizations are doing. And so what we're hearing from providers is delays in payment, incorrect payments. You'd almost think that was the managed care business model. What we're seeing from the state administrative level is long delays in even getting people enrolled in the program. It's So federal law requires that people be enrolled in CanCare within 45 days of their application. We have a backlog that is 6 to 8 months long, perhaps longer because the data that comes out of the state is unreliable. One of the reports today was from Legislative Post Audit, which went to KDHE, which does the enrollment, and they could not verify any of KDHE's numbers about how many people are waiting to be enrolled. I have heard stories about pregnant women who try to enroll in the Medicaid program and have their babies before they're able to enroll and get them treated. We've heard stories of providers that are waiting a year or longer for payment. Where some of these enrollment issues really make a difference are we have nursing homes who admit people and take care of them and then wait 3, 6, 8 months, a year for those people to be enrolled in the Medicaid program before they get paid. We hear stories all the time of people dying in nursing homes before the state enrolls them. And then since they're dead, the state then drops their enrollment. And so those are a lot of those, I could go on and on, but I think you get the idea. And so there needs to be a reform of the CanCare program. This committee is going to make some recommendations tomorrow, but that is going to be something that's going to be on the agenda of the health committees. It's going to take money, which obviously is going to be an issue because we clearly are under-resourced just at the state administrative level. It's also going to take state leadership to make some of these changes. I mean, administrative changes, things like right now, every healthcare provider has to comply with 3 sets of rules from 3 different managed care organizations. So there's 3 times as much administration as there used to be in the program. And so we're talking about things like consolidated rules and standard clinician credentialing and things like that. Whether we can get there or not, we don't know. And he talked about one of the things that Children's Initiative Fund money is used for is connecting kids to mental health. Well, we have to have a mental health system to do that. Our mental health system has been deteriorating for more than a decade that we have had no new money in mental health. And to the point now where community mental health centers are literally at the breaking point. And you guys here in Johnson County should know this intimately because you are using county tax money to prop up the community mental health center, which is supposed to be funded by the state. So you're paying your state taxes and you're then getting taxed again to fulfill this function that the state needs to play. So there needs to be mental health reform. I was just going over the news today. Just today, the state let an RFP to privatize Osawatomie State Hospital. Those of us who are aware of these issues remember a budget proviso last year from the legislature that denied permission for the state to spend any money on privatizing any of the state hospitals without legislative permission. Well, today an RFP is dropped. So a lot of those issues we have to do. On a more positive note, something that a lot of health organizations, including Kansas Action for Children, have been working on for several years is a dental therapy program. This is licensing a mid-level dental provider. We have a real serious problem with access to dental care, especially for Medicaid patients, and this is an opportunity to expand the scope of services that we're able to offer, and that's been something that's been on the table for a long time. And we are going to continue to push for expanding the CanCare program. The issues involved in the reasons we need to do that, lots of people who are uninsured, hospitals and other providers in rural areas that are literally on the financial edge because they don't have coverage for these patients. Those issues are still out there. And kind of a technical issue that I sort of don't want to get too far in the weeds, but one of the things we're looking at the federal level with the new administration, this is something that all our legislators have to pay attention to, is possible block granting of the Medicaid program. A block grant is when the feds essentially write a check to the state for all the money that they're now spending on that program, turn it over to the state. Now there's a couple of dangers there. One of the dangers there is that block grant programs don't always include restrictions on what the money can be used for. So imagine turning over a check to this administration for hundreds of millions of federal dollars with no strings attached. The second thing, and this is directly related to why we are still continuing with the push to expand the Medicaid program while it's still on the table, is there's going to have to be some way for the feds to figure out how much money each state gets. There are 31 states out there that have already expanded their Medicaid programs and are going to be expecting at least some of that money to be included in a block grant. Well, we need to stake our claim. We need to get in the door while it's still open so that we're not left out. And that's going to be an important reason to continue this discussion to make sure we stay focused on it. I'm here tonight not only speaking for my organization, but also for the Alliance for a Healthy Kansas, which is a group that started more than 6 months ago that's brought more than 100 organizations together to push for the Medicaid expansion issue. And I know looking around the room, I've seen probably most of you at some of our forums. We did 30 forums across the state of Kansas, spoke with thousands of people about this issue. Kind of the big picture at the federal level, again, without getting too far into the weeds, is that things are going to change with the Affordable Care Act. We don't know what that change is going to look like, but it's very clear that this Congress is going to be committed to somehow repealing it. That's not going to be an easy thing to do politically. We have 22 million people out there who have insurance under this law, and it's unlikely that Congress is going to want to just yank the rug out. So the kind of mantra now is we can't have repeal without some replacement. The initial thinking is that there's going to be some sort of a repeal, and then they're going to figure out what the replacement's going to look like. And that can get very ugly very fast. If you're interested in kind of the details of what some of those plans might look like, I'm happy to get into them in the Q&A. And then before I give up the mic and turn it over to questions, another thing I want to make sure we still have our eye on, and I know that folks in Johnson County are very familiar with, is the healthcare compact. We remember that from a few years ago. That is a multi-state compact that allows states to take over any or all federal health programs. That is something that needs to be ratified in the Congress, which it seems to me was likely to happen at this point. There's still a legal dispute about whether the president needs to sign it, but I think this president-elect probably would. And then it would come back to Kansas. And it would be up to our legislature to decide, do we want to take over the Medicare program here in Kansas? And again, I just want to throw out the specter of the federal government writing a check for all the money that is spent in Medicare and turning it over to this administration in the state of Kansas. Also, we need to keep our eyes on the ball. It's going to take a while in Washington to figure out what a Medicaid block grant program looks like. Through the healthcare compact, we can just do that really quickly here in the state of Kansas if the legislature wants to go in that direction. So that's another thing we have to keep our eye on, and that could be an end run around the block grant. And again, the compact is very clear. There are absolutely no strings on that money. The check gets written to the state can spend that money on anything they want or use the budget. And so that's kind of an ugly picture to paint, isn't it? I mean, I think to get back to the positives, I think we are going to have some improvements in the Medicaid program in this session. I think the Oversight Committee is finally focused on this. It took them a few years, but they really are fed up with the way this program is being run. And so we're going to see some positive reforms there. And I know that the mental health providers are putting a proposal together to try to get some positive reforms in the mental health system. But again, that's something that's going to take money. And I know that there may be other things in line before some of these health programs in terms of our state budget. And with that, I will turn it back to Ed and we can get to questions.
Once again, if you have questions, fill them out. We'll continue to have our volunteers bring them forward, and we'll try to work through as many of these as we can. I did notice that some of your questions may be beyond this panel and are directed at mainstream. We'll reserve those for later. If we have some time, maybe we can get to those. This is kind of a general question for all three of the panelists. Do you think the governor and legislators will try to address many of the state needs, or will they just focus on one or two? And I would add to that, if you think one or two, what would be the one or two that you would expect them to focus on? Anybody that wants to take this?
It depends on who's the governor. It depends on who's the governor.
Brownback.
I think he might be on his way out. Secretary. Yay.
We're right, Susan.
It was a celebration.
Right. In regards to the question about the issues and which issues, you know, I think that there is a limited amount of bandwidth. Obviously, we already know that they've extended the session by 10 days, so it'll be a longer session than was originally anticipated to get more time to work through these things. I think you have policymakers, returning policymakers, newly elected, who are eager to get to work. I think we're fortunate when I look out at the folks who are coming to Topeka in January. There are faces that I have been seeing routinely at forums like this across the state. As Dwayne and I have traveled Kansas in the last 4 years, I've seen a lot of these faces. And what's great about that is it means that folks are anchored in the issues and they're coming in, I think, with a pretty good foundation. So that's a real positive. But there are some pretty big lifts ahead of them in 2017. You know, you've heard me talk a lot about tax reform. A lot of the other things that matter are driven by, supported by tax reform. So it becomes really difficult. We can come up with a new school funding formula, everybody, and we could promise the sun, the moon, and stars in that funding formula, but it matters not unless we have the revenue to support it. And that starts with the tax reform. And so those are not insignificant conversations. They involve, there's a lot of opinions out there. I mean, certainly we're going to introduce our bill as what we think is a good structure. But I think that those two things take up quite a bit of time. When we look at this and we think about what it takes to kind of restore the health of the state, literally and figuratively, this is a multi-year process. We don't reform taxes in 2017 and suddenly the faucet flows and budgets are restored to where they were pre-recession levels. The health of the state is going to be restored over several legislative sessions. And that is the hard reality that we faced given the decimation of our budget from those unaffordable, dangerous tax changes that were made in 2012. I say that because I want to encourage everyone to have some patience. What's going to have to happen in 2017 to stop the bleeding is the tax reform. Obviously, we've got the K-12 funding formula in there. And then looking at sort of the rest of the needs, I think there's a bit of a triage piece, an element in there, where policymakers are going to have to sort of look at, okay, so we've got some revenue coming back into the state, because this isn't magical, it's not overnight. Even if we fully repealed what we call Brownback, the 2012 or 2013 tax plan, that money doesn't begin flowing just on July 1st, the new budget year. So that's going to take some time incrementally to come back into the state, so that restoration is also going to take time. So when we see this heavy lift, know that it's going to be subsequent years to where we start to get budgets restored back to the place that we were. We start meeting the needs of all Kansans. Those two things don't happen simultaneously.
Sheldon, did you want to add to this one?
Just a little. I think Annie's exactly right. Budget, tax policy, and education, I think, are the issues that are going to take up most of the time. As I went around the state and talked to a lot of candidates who are running, those two issues and Medicaid expansion were typically the three that were top of the list. Medicaid expansion is obviously a little more questionable now, but we still need to address the issues that brought us to why we need Medicaid expansion. And we can't really wait that long on that. Hospitals are going to close. When rural hospitals close, rural communities die. We really can't let that happen. And so we have to move forward both, I think, with expansion, which will obviously depend on what the feds do, but we need to also move forward with these other programs to make sure we can continue to provide basic health services in Kansas.
Hold on to that mic. We've got a couple of questions here on Medicaid. Kind of following up on what you just said, if there is a block grant program for Medicaid, what can be done to assure those dollars are properly used, and what would a block grant mean for providers and consumers?
Those are hard questions because the block grant is going to be crafted in Washington. And so if the first place to do advocacy on what you want block grants to look like is with your federal officials. And so things like whether there are strings attached to that money, that will be decided probably in the basic structure of what a block grant looks like. How much money each state gets and what the timeline is. At what point does the federal government say, this is the point at which we're putting the marker in and that's how much money you get? That's going to be negotiated at the federal level. When it comes to the state, the way block grants usually operate is states have lots of latitude at that point to design their programs. And so it'll be up to our state legislature at that point to determine who's eligible for the Medicaid program. Again, depending on what the structure is that the federal government gives us. Provider payments are always something that's within the purview of the state legislature. I talked to a lot of state legislators when I was working on Medicaid expansion, and a lot of them would say to me, boy, Medicaid's not a great program. It doesn't pay providers very well. And lots of them were surprised to find out that they're actually in control of that. And so that's something that we're going to have to keep our eye on. Guys, there was a 4% provider cut last year. I know that there's a lot of positive enthusiasm to try to figure out a way to turn that around and restore it. But again, that's going to take money in the budget. That's going to get back to the tax policy issues that Annie was talking about. And I think given where the budget is now and looking at the budget whole, I think it's probably more likely that at least in the immediate future, our health providers are looking at more Medicaid cuts rather than getting those cuts restored. So we're in a hole, just like in the budget. We have to dig out.
There's a question for Jennifer. And before I ask the question, I want you to note, you heard it here from North Authority less than Jennifer, that the governor is leaving. Not Facebook, not Twitter, Jennifer Crow.
My phone's exploding on that one already.
All right, the question is, what additional legislation can we expect as far as attacks on our judges, or are we in the clear?
I think with the new makeup of the House and the Senate, we're not in the clear, but it's a heck of a lot better. I think we've got it takes 21 votes to defend against something or to pass something. So as far as playing defense, I think we've got a solid 21 who would be in support of our judiciary. And I think in the House, it's even better. I think we could get up to 73 votes as far as moderate and Democrat that would be supportive of our judges. So, and it takes a constitutional amendment to change the selection process for Supreme Court justices. They did it already for the appeals court judges, and maybe we should try to dial that back. That might be good. Because now the governor is only able to, he unilaterally picks who will be a replacement on the appeals court, and the Supreme Court is still constitutional, and there's no way that under these numbers they're going to be able to change that. So I guess my answer is, now that I've announced Brownback's leaving, my answer is that the state of the judiciary is good. And I think they're going to be back in the chambers of the House of Representatives, actually giving the state of the judiciary, which has not happened for 4 years.
Well, I've got the mic. Here's a question about, and maybe you could say a little bit about the organization, Kansas for Fair Courts. How can the public be better educated, and where is information available about the judges?
Kansas for Fair Courts has been working on this issue for, well, the last 4 years. Ryan Wright is the executive director. They have a website that is kansasforfaircourts.org, and they send out a lot of information, educational, and advocacy if you want to join their mailing list. the organization is dedicated to educating the public on our judiciary, because clearly we don't have a good understanding statewide of the three branches of government and how they interact. And the fact that the judiciary can't defend itself. And that they don't run for office, they don't campaign, they make decisions, and those are opinions, but they are still binding. And that's what this organization is dedicated to, is to making sure that, or I guess to making progress toward an understanding of a branch that apparently is a mystery. So.
Here's a question for Annie, and I'm going to expand on the questioner's question here. You didn't say a whole lot about this pending school finance decision, so let's assume that there is a decision that
I hadn't heard about that.
I'll see you after the meeting, Annie. Let's assume that there is a Supreme Court decision that in some respect requires additional funding for education. What do you expect the legislature, how do you expect them to go about addressing that? And then within that, if you could answer this specific question about, is there anything that could happen that would enable schools to raise funds themselves for specific needs of those schools?
I'm going to phone a friend. I'm going to call on Representative Melissa Rooker. I'm not kidding.
You've already used your life like
Well, I would say it's very likely or certain that we will have a decision in the Gannon case from the Supreme Court prior to our return in January. And we've lost, I think, 9 times in this particular lawsuit. There's no expectation the state will prevail. So the big question is what their opinion looks like. And I think from the hearing on September 21st, which I attended, the questions were really specific about what each side expected in terms of a judgment from the court and what would satisfy them. And I think it may actually look a lot like the equity opinion, where we are given a series of options, a framework, if you will. Option number 1 in the equity case was called the safe harbor by the court, which was simply reverting back to the way the equalization aid was calculated. And I think they can do the same thing with the school finance formula, because we had a formula that was constitutionally tested and passed muster. It was simply inadequately and unconstitutionally funded. So I would expect option 1 to be a new safe harbor, which is reverting to the old formula as it existed and improving the funding that flows into it. Option 2 in the equity case, and could be constructed for this case as well, the adequacy phase, would be you, the legislature, have the opportunity to craft a formula of your own design and submitting it to us for our approval under review. And so that is what we as a legislature tried for 2 years to do in equity, and I would suggest that is probably what we will try and do again, which is to design a new and different formula. Option 3 was, the court recognized that we have the right to do nothing and defy them, and you saw the brinksmanship that led to the special session in June this year. That is not a path that I would prefer to see us go down. I do hope that we have a more temperate legislative body that will avoid that path again. A lot will depend on the leadership elections for the House and Senate. We both chambers, the newly elected folks will meet December 5th. We will choose our leadership in our respective chambers and our respective caucuses. So House Republicans will meet, House Democrats will meet. There are leadership positions for both groups of people. Same thing on the Senate side. The big races are the Senate President and the House Speaker. So stay tuned, because that those decisions that we make will set the tone and shape the character of the session ahead. I would say in terms of how we fund it, because I have long believed that we do need to infuse additional funding in the K-12 formula for our schools. It ties in, I've been in front of audiences with Mainstream in my own town halls and talking to my constituents for years. It will require new money being infused. We've frozen funding for years at levels already found to be inadequate. So how we distribute it, how much we distribute are the key questions. But I would say we are not in a position to do this all at once. So I've been talking about comprehensive plans and long-range strategic planning. It's going to take a lot of focus on how we ramp up to get to the constitutional levels. And I think if we put our full faith and effort into this, we can get the job done. I promise you we're not going back without ideas for what we need to be doing and how we take a look at it. It's fabulous to know that on the tax reform side, there will be some appropriate recommendations, and there are a lot of us that really do care about doing the right thing. So I don't have specific answers, but to frame what lies ahead, we need patience, we need understanding, and we need support, because the decisions that will be made, you are programmed not to like, right? No one wants the taxes raised. Nobody, we're programmed to think government already spends too much. The schools are already getting too much. But we have some real structural problems, and we have a terrific opportunity to solve them. And you all, thank you very much for sending a new roster of really bright people that will join in the effort to get things done properly.
Back to medical issues. There's a couple here. One is that did the reductions in the change to CanCare result in any loss of federal match dollars?
Short answer is yes. So in Kansas, the Medicaid program, in every state, the Medicaid program funding is shared jointly by the federal government and the state government. Here in Kansas, the state pays 44% of the bill, and the feds pay 56%. So every dollar we cut, we lose about $1.28 in federal funds. And so the 4% reduction in funding to our providers came with also a big reduction in federal funds as well.
Just follow up to that. Whose bright idea was that? Who are the winners here?
Well, whose bright idea was that? That was one of the things the governor did to plug his budget hole. Medicaid is the second biggest item in the state budget after K-12 education. So that's where there was a lot of money, and he needed money quick. And one of the quick ways to get money is to reduce how much we pay our providers in Medicaid, which I will point out is already really, really low. A lot of doctors don't participate in Medicaid because the payments are so low. It's likely that most providers lose money with every Medicaid patient they treat. We took their rates down another 4% on top of that. The numbers really add up when you look at some of the larger hospitals. What 4% rate reduction means for them means millions and millions of dollars. You have some of those big hospitals right here in Johnson County. And so that's money that used to flow into your hospitals to pay for services and then flows throughout the community that is gone.
In preparing for tonight's meeting, I did a little bit of online research about Medicaid and the potential proposals under the Trump plans. I was surprised, first of all, there are a lot of Republican plans out there. That was news to me. Every single one of them calls for a cut to Medicaid. They have different approaches to it, but everyone ends up with a reduction in federal support for state Medicaid. And I used to wonder why the governor was so reluctant to trust Congress to fund Medicaid. And now we know who he was talking to. is very clear. It's a long-range plan, and I think it's uphill for us to preserve that. And I think that's what Sheldon was saying earlier.
Well, let me just add to that, if I could. I mean, block grants essentially have 2 points to them. One is the idea that states are better able to determine how money should be spent, and so control of the spending should go from the federal government to the state government. The other reason, and the primary reason for block grants, is to reduce the amount of money the federal government spends. And so the way block grants typically work is states get their total pool of money in the first year, and then in subsequent years, even though medical costs might go up by 5%, the state gets 2%. And the money eventually shrinks. And so there are various ways to cut healthcare spending. That's one of them. I will also point out that included in a lot of Republican plans, including Speaker Ryan's, which right now looks like the one that holds the most weight. We're talking about similar things happening with the Medicare program. We're talking about premium support for Medicare, which means ending the federal government running the Medicare program and essentially giving seniors a check to go out and buy private insurance. And the way that would be done is it'll be 10 years out in the future, so it doesn't affect anybody in Medicare now or close to Medicare, as a way to try to suppress some of the opposition. But you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to be seeing those proposals coming out probably not too long after Congress convenes in January.
Here's a general question. Oh, go ahead.
Just real quick. An example of that at the state level, the block grant issue is temporary assistance for needy families, which is block granted to the state of Kansas and has been rated to help fill the budget gap. So what Sheldon says is absolutely right on target. We have a governor and decisions of the majority former legislature that took money out of that fund and applied it and used creative accounting, smoke and mirrors, however you want to call it, magic math, is that what we call it now? To reallocate those funds and pretend like they were for needy families. So that's the same thing that'll happen with Medicaid.
And on that note, I think we talked about heavy lifts for the legislature this session, and pivoting off of what Jen said about the temporary assistance needy families, which supports the safety net that helps low-income, vulnerable Kansas families meet basic needs like paying for childcare assistance or putting food on the table. We have made a lot of really restrictive policy changes to that safety net over the last several years in very punitive, unnecessary ways, condemning poor people in the state of Kansas for no good reason. That money still sits there. It comes into the state in the block grant, and we've used it inappropriately for other programs. But the fact of the matter is, some of those policy changes don't necessarily come with a price tag. And they are things that this legislature could do. There are ways in which we could strengthen our statutes around childcare. There are policy victories like that that don't come with a price tag that I fully, I don't know that I expect, but I would say that I am excited and encouraged by these new policymakers, that there would be a greater will to look at things like that and make those changes to help improve childcare around the state of Kansas, to help increase access for low-income working Kansas families to supports like childcare assistance or job training services. Those are other opportunities that we have. We talked a little bit earlier about what those opportunities were. There are other opportunities like that where we have gutted policies over the last several years in a bunch of different areas around teachers and some other places. And so we have chances for this legislature to address some of those things too. You might think of that as lower hanging fruit, right? Because it doesn't come with a price tag, but still would make a lot of difference in the state.
Kind of following up on that last comment, here's a question asking what people in the audience can do during the legislative session. And I think maybe with the background that these are activists and are somewhat informed, how can they get engaged with specific issues, monitor what is happening in a way that they could weigh in on a timely basis?
So in terms of some of the things that we advocate for at Kansas Action for Children, I mentioned the tax policy reform. That's at the top of our list for the first time in a long time. But we also are looking at the safety net. We're looking at regulations around childcare and dental therapy. So those are things that are front of mind for us. We advocate on a lot of other issues, but you can sign up for our weekly newsletter, which sends out action alerts as well as kind of a summary at the end of the week. Our capital is called Capital Connection, and in there we summarize what's going on in KAC's world and sometimes the world of our partners. That's a great way to connect, but also if you are active on Twitter, Kansas Action for Children staff are under the dome routinely. Our government relations director, Amanda Gress, is a prolific tweeter. That's what happens when your government relations director is a millennial. And so she's very active and frequently keeping people connected. And I think that that's another way. We certainly use Facebook as well. But if you don't have the opportunity to stay plugged in moment to moment, there's some key people that you can follow at the State House via Twitter. I would also encourage you to sign up for the newsletters of policymakers, both your own and others, because I think that that's also a great way to stay connected and know what's going on. Those are just a handful of ways. I would also, of course, say I've got to plug the former group, Kansas Center for Economic Growth, also a good way to stay connected to what's happening on budget and tax policy.
Sheldon, Jennifer, anything to add?
I would echo everything Andy said. I mean, on healthcare issues, KHI News Service does a great job of covering what's going on in healthcare issues in the state. That's khi.org. Stay tuned because that email address may be changing soon, but it is khi.org right now. You can follow me on Twitter at ACA Resource. I suspect I might have to get a new handle though. A way to get action alerts on Medicaid expansion and other Medicaid issues would be through the Alliance for a Healthy Kansas, and that's expandcancare.com. And as I said, we're going to be continuing our efforts on CanCare expansion in addition to CanCare protection and reforming the program. And so that's the Alliance for Healthy Kansas is a good group to stay plugged into. And I'll just echo what Andy said. Stay connected to your legislators. If they have newsletters, sign up to get them. Come and talk to them at community forums, and make sure you let them know what's on your mind.
Jennifer?
I would echo that. Hashtag ksleg, like short for legislature, is the go-to on Twitter. And you get all the press coverage, and then you get legislators that tweet about what's going on. So that's a kind of general good thing to follow. Aside from that, we got in 2 more years, these folks are going to be up for re-election, and they are going to have to make some really nasty decisions over the next 2 years. And so we can't go back to where we were. So you've got to stay engaged, because this is just the beginning, and it's going to take a lot to rebuild, and it's going to take a lot to turn the ship around. So
Raise the ship from the bottom.
find the ship.
So there's one thing I wanted to add before that. I just wanted to echo what Jennifer said in terms of supporting legislators. They're going to be making some really hard decisions that are going to generate some ugly postcards in the next election. And so just support them as best you can. The other thing I wanted to say is this is an issue, this is a forum on state issues in the Kansas legislature, but to the extent that a lot of our health issues are going to be determined by what happens to the federal government, you need to stay plugged in there too. So make sure you're on Representative Yoder's mailing list and Representative Jenkins and the 2 senators, Moran and Roberts, and really make sure you're talking to them right now. No repeal of the ACA without a replacement, no block granting of Medicaid without federal strings attached, things like that. So make sure that your federal legislators know how you feel, because a lot of the important issues are going to start at that federal level.
Here's a question for Annie. Who will be introducing your bill on your behalf, and do they have a bulletproof vest?
We're still taking applicants. So we haven't made our decision yet. We're still working on drafting that bill in all cases, and we'll be making that determination at a later date. But, you know, in terms of the general election just having happened and seeing who's going to be in the building in 2017, we certainly didn't want to target anybody too soon. I think what we're putting forward, though, is common sense reform. There isn't anything that's terribly radical about the proposal that will come out on December 7th. It's what we've all known needed to happen, but couldn't get there because either the will of the leadership wasn't there at all, or the legislative body couldn't get it done. Or what they were proposing were not the right fixes, just closing a loophole. That was a vote that our legislature faced at the end of last session. And it, you know, to borrow the phrase of someone that I see a lot in the building, it would have been a false choice. It would have been a false choice because it would have done nothing to save our budget. And a lot of really wise policymakers who are returning recognize that and did not make that vote because that would not have been real reform. So what we're proposing on December 7th is not some pie in the sky radical dream. It's just about restoring stability to Kansas's budget. And I think that that's something that a majority of Kansans can absolutely get behind. And we know that a lot of these policymakers, these newly elected folks, were sent there to do just that. And so we really look forward to having those conversations. This is a starting point. December 7th is intended to be a starting point. It's not about winning. It's not about our proposal getting in. It's about fixing the problem. And that may look like a lot of things once we get everybody around the negotiating table and we've got folks in the House and the Senate working on that.
Did you pick Pearl Harbor Day for a reason?
Eddie, you know, I know it's kind of early yet, but have you all started counting noses? Do you have any idea whether there are enough votes to change tax policy or to override a governor's veto?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the votes to enact policy that needs to have happened in the last couple of years or to override a veto, I think it's issue by issue. I don't think you can look blanketly at either chamber and say, yeah, we've got the votes for everything. I don't think that's the case. I think when it comes to tax reform, we do feel that it's possible to pass tax reform. Whether or not there's enough to override a veto, I think remains to be seen. But when you look at the makeup of the House in particular is one chamber that we've been looking at with all the changes that have been made across the state. A lot of those folks that are coming in talked about the need to reform tax policy, along with the returning folks coming back, and then a handful of others. I believe that the will is there. I also think that there's recognition that if it doesn't get done in the 2017 legislative session, it's not hanging on anymore. It's not cutting down to the bone. It's lopping things off, because the gap that we're faced with right now for the budget year that starts on July 1st is more than 10%. After 9 consecutive rounds of budget cuts and what likely will be a 10th proposal by the governor when he releases his budget, if we don't do something in the 2017 legislative session, what awaits us in the coming fiscal year is something that we can't even begin to wrap our heads around. And that is without a new price tag for school finance. Right now, it sits at a nearly 10% budget hole on top of what we face just to get between January and June. So there is a sense of urgency to get this done in 2017, and I think policymakers understand that. We just have to be very careful and not hastily rush into this and slap something together and say, here, this is the fix. And I think that we have a lot of very thoughtful policymakers returning and newly elected who are wanting to do that and who recognize that.
Well, our time for Q&A has come to an end, and we want to try to keep on schedule. So at this time, I'd ask that, first of all, if you would thank our panelists for their work. Then I'd like to recognize our Executive Director, Brandy Fisher. I'm looking forward to the and Brandy wants to say a few words about Main Street. Before I turn the mic over to her, I want to say a few words about Brandy. This year, Mainstream has taken a much more active role in campaigns than it has in the past. We supported in the primary election, was it 7 candidates, I believe, and we had 5 successes out of those 7. In the general, we supported 6 candidates, and 4 of them won. But this was not, we're a small group. We had really a staff of 1 plus some part-timers to help. We did an extensive get out the vote in addition to those efforts on behalf of candidates. Brandy oversaw all of that. We've continued to have forums throughout this period. And again, Brandy didn't do it by herself, but the responsibility fell with Brandy. It's been a very successful year for Mainstream. We concluded with our annual dinner, the largest ever turnout that we've had, and she may be giving you some figures about that here in a minute. But I really think Brandy deserves, first of all, recognition and your thanks for all of the work that she's put in, really on your behalf.
Thank you, and we should be drinking Brandy Alexander's every night, especially before my review. That's good stuff. I'm Brandy Fisher. I'm the Executive Director of Mainstream Coalition. And I want to thank you all for coming. I see a lot of familiar faces. And so those of you that have been to our events before know we often meet in the northeastern part of the county. And we have a solid membership there. I was telling someone earlier tonight, I think 2,000 people in Senate 7 alone, which is that Prairie Village area. We worked hard to expand out, and we have these fantastic moderate legislators now throughout the county, and we need to make sure that we are growing the network so that we can support them and make sure that they continue past 2018. So thanks to Julie here at, I always want to say Stanley Presbyterian. Is that okay? It's good enough. Presbyterian Church of Stanley, who has been asking us for months to come out south and have this here, and thanks to her hospitality and the church's hospitality, we made it out. I always want a crowd, and then I'm always nervous, are people going to come? So thanks to those of you that came from Prairie Village and Fairway and North, and thanks to the new faces here that came, and our friends that have been schlepping down north for years. Thank you for being here. I want to quickly thank the panel, of course, the committee and our board, our elected officials. And Ed mentioned me, thank you. We're actually a solid staff of 3. Danny Nova, who does our communications, and Lisa Patterson-Kinsey, who organized this event along with the committee tonight. Mainstream has a mantra, and it's vote, do more than vote. And Mainstream's been able to grow the last few years and this year because so many people supported us in doing more. And because of that, we've had a stellar year. We've worked with great partners. Some of them I see in the room tonight. Through our work, we were able to hire canvassers. We hired 20 canvassers between the primary and the general. They hit 15,000 doors with a C3 message of getting out the vote and voting the full ballot, making sure that we voted all the way down to those judicial races at the bottom. They made over 100 calls to targeted businesses to encourage businesses to give their employees time off or reminders to go vote. We held 2 community voter blitz days with 50 canvassers coming and volunteering to get out the vote. So this was all nonpartisan. This is really at the fundamental level of, if we are going to have a strong functioning democracy, we need as many people voting as possible. We called thousands of voters, and 2 weeks ago, and I know many of you were there, we had our largest stand-up speak out dinner to date, with more than 750 Republicans, Democrats, and independents together in one room at a political event fighting for shared values and goals. Through our coalition, so Mainstream's complicated for a very small organization, that's our C3. Our C4, we mail a weekly newsletter. Many of you receive it. If you don't, and there's lots of newsletters we've mentioned signing up for tonight, please sign up for it. We only send one once a week. You can go to mainstreamcoalition.org. We'll be sending the information out about the press conference that Annie mentioned in December. We hold a monthly legislative forum. We testify in Topeka. But most importantly, we work to give you the tools so that you can be strong advocates. And finally, through our PAC, we do endorsements. Our endorsements were utilized this year over 20,000 times. We put up online ads to promote candidates in targeted races, and we sent almost 100,000 postcards. That was thanks to those of you in this room who have been with us, some since the beginning, others for the last few years. Thank you for allowing us to be able to push out voting and allow us to push out doing more than voting. So the task isn't complete. I've heard in the past that people say, oh, you know, mainstream, there are these forums and you talk, and is that really action? Well, yeah, right? How can we be active if we're not informed? So first, I want to thank every one of you in the room for being here tonight. The whole conversation I heard in sort of the pre-period, the cocktail era without cocktails, was, I'm so busy, this is my 4th meeting today, but I wanted to come. And yeah, and that's what it takes, is coming. I mean, I have a friend here that got a sitter to be here tonight. I was like, ooh, that's events. So I left my husband's at home. Right, date night at Main Street, right here. Love it. Those Randy Alexanders. We have to be informed, and so the first step, I mean, you're here, you're informed, you're getting our newsletter. If you're not, you're going online to mainstreamcoalition.org to sign up for it. But then we need to know who our legislators are. And I know many of you do, so forgive me if I'm preaching to the choir, but I know many of you don't, and no shame there, many of them are new. So a lot of you wrote on your name tag, your name, and then who your legislator, your House rep, and your Senate rep is. But I would challenge each of you tonight to not leave here until you're sure who those 2 people are. I think we have 11 legislators here tonight, most of them representing this area, and here north and west. Meet them. I'm sure some of them, they've stayed this long. They've already been to 7 meetings today. We'll stay and talk with you. Find them. If you don't know your legislator, we have people outside that will help you find them. So on your seats, there's postcards. Maybe you already wrote your questions on them, and that's fine. But if you didn't, use that postcard to write your first letter to your legislator. Pick either your House or Senate, or do one for each. And it can be as simple as this. I'm staring at Melissa Rooker. So dear Representative Rooker, I'm your constituent, but don't email your own. But if you were in Representative Rooker's area, and I look forward to supporting your efforts to turn around Kansas. These are my own top priorities. Please add me to your newsletter list, and thank you for all you're doing. Sign your name. We will mail them for you. So if you take a minute now, we actually wrapped up a little early, take a minute, write those 3 sentences, we will send those for you. If you want to send them yourself, take it with you. If you want to go and look up who your person is, but don't leave here until you know who your state rep is and your state senator.
Give us your email.
Oh, and write your email on that postcard so they can add you to their newsletter list. Right, don't say add me. Good call. So the election was 2 weeks ago. I think some of the crowd tonight, and I'm thrilled by the crowd, is that we're still in the app, it's still fresh, right? In January, we'll be meeting again, and stay engaged. And when you come back, and I hope the church will have us back, when you come back, bring someone new with you. And we say that every time, but it's never been more important. So we have almost 200 here tonight. Look, this is a big room. I'm told it holds like 1,500. Is that possible? I don't know. 400 next time we're back in Stanley. So bring someone with you. And now I see the whole Wyandotte contingency. Thank you for coming all the way to Stanley. Those are our diehards. Bring someone with you. Have someone else sign up to get the newsletter, because we are the movement. We are the support. But these legislators cannot do it alone. So they need each of us. Further conversation sort of across down the street at Mi Ranchito. No Randy Alexanders, but I think margaritas. And I'm going to close on just one quote that I just saw on Facebook. Maybe many of you saw it, but it spoke to me. And it's this: I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept.